If you haven't logged in recently, it will have you log in with both your username and password that you use in the employee portal. And all teachers will access performance tasks through the GVC guides that we showed you in our earlier video. To access those guides, you come to the 5-step process, expand that section, come down to a grade level. We're going to look at 3rd grade today. And then you would click on the file and click on the cloud to download. I happen to already have one open, so we're going to use this copy.
As we mentioned earlier, as we were talking about our GVC, you're going to find the performance tasks for each content in the 3rd column of your pacing guide.
So when we think about our performance tasks, we really want to emphasize a couple of things that Jen's going to talk about right now.
When you're thinking about your performance tasks, one thing you want to make sure you consider is the fact that they should be aligned to the instruction that's occurring within that particular unit of study, and they're intended to be a natural part of your instruction. So it should not feel like an event. It should feel in alignment with what you're doing. So as you're planning for your unit of study, it's something that you want to take a look at beforehand, along with the scoring key to kind of see where are you going within that unit of study, and where to kind of guide some of your instruction. Along with that, though, they do not assess every single standard within that particular window, but they are intended to assess portions that make sense along with your instruction.
They also can be considered sort of a hybrid of a formative and a summative, depending on how you're using them. These performance tasks are generally given in line with your instruction, but after you have taught something to some students. So you should be able to take them and then kind of see where your kids are at in regard to the standards. However, from a formative perspective, you should also be able to analyze them for next steps and think about what you should really be doing with your students next instructionally to help them continue to make progress towards those standards. We currently have performance tasks in math, science, and social studies, with English Language Arts, ELA, being integrated into those social studies tasks.
Oftentimes within the social studies ELA tasks, you're going to be seeing reading standards with an occasional writing standard when it makes sense, but primarily it'll be the reading standards within those ELA social studies performance tasks.
Let's look very quickly at math, science, and social studies performance tasks, just to give you a sense of how to access them and how they're set up. So when we come to this math section, we have to go through the front matter first, including the at a glance. And we'll come to a unit of study where you can see a math performance task called out in this resources column. For example, in our first unit of study, there's no performance task for this unit of study. That doesn't mean there won't still be assessments and tasks outlined in investigations that would be great for your own knowledge. However, the tasks that will be given to students with samples given or turned into the curriculum department are outlined here. When we look at the task, they are all hyperlinked. This is why it can be important for you to access your GVC guides electronically instead of printing them out. It should take you directly to the task located on SRM. The first thing you see is this overview sort of page. It tells you the name of the task, the instructional window, the grade level. You also have the aligned standards, including the math practices, so that as you're thinking about grading purposes, and sometimes it may be appropriate based upon your own discretion to put this in the grade book, you already have some alignment right here. If you don't feel like this is representative of your kids' progress towards those standards, it's up to you whether this is a grade that goes in the grade book or not. For math, it tells you the investigations page is needed, your additional information for administering, so the places you might be able to look, any alignments or alterings you may need to do for the tasks to meet the standards, and anything extra you may need to give kids to be able to get a little bit more writing. You also have supporting information for interpreting. These places in this last column are really meant to help with that grading or assessing what students know and are able to do, so that as we think about really one of the purposes of performance tasks being able to identify next instructional steps, this supporting information is going to help teachers do that. From a math perspective, if I look down, the next thing I generally have is the scoring key. We're going to come back and we'll talk about scoring keys at the end, because we'll have some commonalities within our scoring keys. But from a math perspective, most of the time our assessments will live right in investigations, so it will just give you the pages you need to be able to access that task. Remembering that at the end of an instructional window, we can click at the bottom to be able to go back to the table of contents. Let's look at science next.
The science piece has a lot of commonality with the math that Amanda just talked about. You'll scroll through all the front matter, and you are also going to notice something different about the pacing guide for science. It is color-coded. Where you see the blue, the green, and the orange, these are going to be units of study that are directly aligned to the next generation science standards. And in those units, you will find your performance task. If you'll scroll on down, you will find a unit of study, science performance task, exactly in the third column like the math. The pieces of the science performance task will always include an inquiry and then a piece of writing, a writing prompt. The inquiry will be scored according to the National Geographic rubric, and that's not turned in. But the writing prompt will have the scoring key aligned to it. The writing prompt is always in a rectangular box, and it will give you detailed information following that about how to prepare for the performance task. It will give you a series of tasks that you should complete before giving the students the opportunity to respond. It gives you very detailed instruction. Oftentimes there'll be additional reading that needs to be done, and in some cases students will have to do short research projects or do some inquiry on their own in order to answer the prompt. Going farther down, you will see, very similar to math, the different components of the performance task and how they align to the pieces of next generation science standards. You'll see this is the scoring key that we have just seen, and that will tell you what you need to focus on as far as the writing prompt information.
We'll come back and we'll talk about those scoring keys in just a second. Let's quickly look at a social studies task.
And as we said earlier, the social studies has ELA embedded into it. So you are going to be doing, covering both social studies standards and different ELA components.
So for example, again, that lives in the third column of your pacing guide within the social studies pacing guide. As we wait for that to open up, what you'll see at the beginning of this particular performance task, it does give some background information of why this particular one is around National Days of Listening, so it has a little additional information. But then as you scroll down, you'll see the social studies standards addressed as well as the ELA standards that are addressed. There's some details around the explanation of the alignment to standards, materials that are needed. There's a description of an overview of the task itself. And then if you continue down, it'll give you, the teacher, some information about what you might need to consider when preparing for the task. And then you get into the task itself. If there are multiple tasks present, they will build upon each other in preparation for students to respond to the particular prompt that's provided within the box. And so students will respond to that writing prompt. Sometimes they'll be reading text and responding to a prompt. In some of the primary grades, you might be reading text to students and having them respond to the prompt, but there will always be that consistency there. And then as you scroll down, you'll see the scoring key here as well. And this particular one looks a little bit different because of the format we've used in terms of assessing our speaking and listening standards. This one you see social studies, content, organization, language, and conventions. And then as you continue to go down, there will be a speaking and listening one that identifies the ELA standard. This is atypical for our scoring keys. In the other windows, if you scroll back up, in the other windows you'll actually see a social studies content, and then you will see an ELA content next to it. And this is what you will use to score your students' writing.
And so quickly talking about scoring keys, the scoring keys are set up the same way in the contents in that your first column here will always be around content, whether it's math, science, or social studies, or ELA. You always have an organization column, language and vocabulary, and conventions.
In the language and vocabulary portion, we don't often call out specific words that need to be used. The wording is more generic in that the student uses domain-specific vocabulary, and that's left up to the teacher's discretion. It should reflect what has been taught during specific units of study.
And one of the reasons for doing that is a nudge towards authentic assessment. We want to see what students can do independently, and so it becomes more important to see the words that kids use during these types of tasks.
I would also add that in terms of organization, that will vary from task to task across the contents. Sometimes tasks warrant more specific information about organization, and other times tasks don't warrant that specific information, and that again should be reflective of the content, and it should be reflective of the instruction that's been occurring leading up to the task.
When scoring is meant to be done collaboratively, so groups of grade level teachers, potentially with teacher leaders helping support at times, are really meant to be looking at these as a group. And so rather than a kind of trade and grade sort of perspective, what we're really hoping is that teachers will be able to really analyze their students' work for next instructional steps. When you look at the scoring key, however, you have three places where student scores can fall: meeting the expectations of the performance, approaching the expectations, or no response. When you think about turning this in, meeting typically means that students have completed all portions of the performance task in a satisfactory kind of way, at least for the content. There are times where making simple computational errors or other minor mistakes will actually drop you down to this approaching section, which can become a little uncomfortable at times when you see the minor mistakes students may have made. However, when thinking about measuring on-track and on-time progress, from a district perspective, really looking at which students meet versus which students approach give us a better sense of students' on-track and on-time progress towards those standards. However, from a teacher's perspective, you can absolutely take these tasks and really analyze them for next instructional steps, looking for what might just be simple mistakes or errors within a student's work and what are genuine misconceptions or gaps in understanding.
And in that light, we've provided you with annotated exemplars of students who meet expectation, which is not to say that those are perfect papers by any means, but the annotations will show you the specific portions where a student does meet the expectation of the scoring key in a way that is authentic.
We showed you how to find those in our previous screencast, but remembering those are accessed through the table of contents within your GVC guide. The last thing to kind of know is that for each performance task you give, you'll be submitting 2 samples to the curriculum department that both meet the content or meet the expectations of the content as well